Welcome to the Wyoming Women's Business Center's 2020 webinar series. Today's presentation, Selling Skills Course Number 6, Overcoming Objections. I'm Christine Langley with the Wyoming Women's Business Center, and I'm going to be your speaker today. And just to clarify, this webinar is the last in a series of 6 webinars focused on selling skills. Each session has been recorded and it's available for viewing to all registered attendees. So you'll notice the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen, and I want to call attention to the questions panel. If you have any comments or questions during the webinar today, I'd like you to use those to communicate with me. Now, immediately following this presentation, we're going to launch a survey. I ask you to stay on and complete that survey because it provides us and our funding partners with valuable information. So all of our participants are muted to minimize background noise today. So once again, if you have any questions during the presentation, just type them into that questions panel. So we're going to get started with some quick information on the Wyoming Women's Business Center. And then we'll dive into our topic and finish up with a Q&A at the end. This is a 30-minute format, and we appreciate everybody joining us today on what might be your lunch break. So the Wyoming Women's Business Center is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to enable and empower Wyoming entrepreneurs, with a special emphasis on women who are economically or socially disadvantaged. And we do that through 4 distinct programs. The first is our business counseling and training program, which is always free. The second is our microfinance programs, which offer microloans and individual development accounts. The third is our Artist Development Center. We run that in conjunction with our Works of Wyoming store and the Art Connect Gallery in downtown Laramie. And then lastly, we recently launched our COVID-19 support program last June. Now, this particular webinar series is brought to you by our microfinance department, so I just want to call special attention to our microloan program. We provide loans for those unable to get loans through traditional means for up to $50,000. And so if you'd like more information on that, you can contact our office. All right, so let's do a quick recap of our sales funnel from our first session. We talked about identifying the stages of our sales process using these terms. And our goal is to drive people from suspects to prospects, prospects to customers, and finally, customers to advocates. And so while we're doing this, of course, we understand that there's leaks in our funnel and that we lose people or people drop out of our funnel as we make progress. And so that means we always have to have a strong marketing plan to ensure that we're always adding new suspects and prospects to the top of our funnel. And so today we're going to finish up that last essential in selling, which is asking for the sale. And if you remember from our last session, we delivered our closing question, and we had the option of really 3 primary closing techniques. The first was the assumptive close. We use that if we have strong buying signals. The second is the direct or hard close. We use that if we don't have strong buying signals and we really just need to know what our prospect's thinking. And then lastly, the option or contained choice close to give our prospects options of equal value, but maybe packaged differently. So if we met all the prospects' needs throughout our selling process, then we hope we've already answered any objections. But it is common for people to object prior to that final commitment. And that's why the 7th step of our sales process is handling objections. So let's start by understanding what an objection is in the first place. You know, objections are when buyers push back on what you're offering in that moment. And so while handling these concerns can be frustrating, especially when the majority of your conversation nowadays is probably not in person, objections are just an opportunity for progress towards a mutual agreement. So anytime your prospect raises a concern, I want you to consider it a chance for you to establish and cement credibility with them. And the more credibility you can create quickly, the further along you're going to be towards closing the deal. So I always want to encourage my clients to reframe objections in their own mind and just think of them as opportunities. Because generally a prospect objects for one of a few reasons. The first being because they're just not a believer yet. The second is you haven't explained the value fully enough. And then lastly, maybe they're trying to establish points for future negotiations. So each of these options gives you an opportunity to move the conversation forward. And in every sales call, the prospect is challenging the salesperson to deliver a solution that meets their needs in a specific time range at an investment level that aligns with their perceived budget. And these challenges often come in the form of sales objections. So before we dive into the framework for overcoming objections, let's cover just some tips and tactics that can help. First, I always encourage clients to take a pause. Successful reps, we know, pause 5 times longer than their counterparts, and they remain calm in the face of adversity. So if a prospect introduces a concern, don't be afraid to take a breath and consider exactly what you want to say or ask. Second tip is just to slow down. Top reps slowed down their talking speed when addressing objections, and they spoke at about 176 words per minute, while others maintained an average of 188 words per minute. So I want you to project authority when addressing concerns by speaking slowly, calmly, and with certainty. This is where those power words can come into play, and make sure you're not using any weasel words. Talk less. When a prospect voices a concern, it can be tempting to kind of rattle off all the reasons to reassure them. But top reps talk far less overall. You may want to consider countering with a question. So in our objection handling framework that's coming up, we always recommend that sellers help buyers feel understood by clarifying their concerns with a question. And the top sellers counter objections with questions far more often than the average sellers. Validating their concern. So give your buyer the gift of feeling understood, and you'll carry powerful influence. Use the phrase, "That's a valid concern. It seems like you're," and then fill in the blank with an emotion that they expressed. For example, "That's a valid concern, Pam. It seems like you're pretty torn on what to do here." You have them feeling like you're an ally and that you can truly help because you get it. And then a final tactic you can employ is called mirroring. Mirror your buyer's final few words with an upward tone. "The price is too high?" "Your boss said no?" "Timing isn't right?" By reflecting your prospect's language and concerns back to them with a slight question at the end, you can make them feel heard and understood. And it encourages them to actually explain further. All right, let's get into the framework and expand that script that you've already been writing. So you're going to acknowledge the objection and ask to confirm you understand it correctly. And that means we're going to find the real objection. So here's an example. "Okay, Tom, let me play this back to you so I can confirm we're on the same page. You feel like our software takes too long to deploy based specifically on what your friend told you. Is that right?" You can ask clarifying questions to find the source of the objection and the business impact that it concerns. Here's another example. "What type of time frame for implementation would be in alignment with your company's expectations?" After you fully understand the buyer's difficulty, now it's time to express empathy. Step number 2. When you speak with prospects, you want to try and walk in their shoes. So ask them directly, "What are you feeling? What are your thoughts on the changes happening at your organization?" Empathy requires that you actually shift your perspective and attempt to feel what someone else is going through. So in practice, that means using active listening techniques, not interrupting, asking for clarification, hopefully withholding judgment, and then sharing the dialogue with your prospect. A great way to connect empathy and your proposed solution, which is really just providing features and benefits in our framework here, step number 3, is to use feel, felt, found statements, or the feel, felt, found method. So let's take a look at this. When you use feel statements, you reiterate the buyer's objection and show that you understand, you're listening to their misgivings. When you use a felt statement, you help the buyer feel that they're not alone in their concern because you've helped other customers with similar issues. And then lastly, the found statements, those explain the misconception behind the original expectation. So what truth did other customers learn that satisfied their problem? So here's an example of the feel, felt, found method in action. It might sound something like this. Customers that have recently bought used to feel that same way. And they felt concerned that historically our industry is notorious for complex implementations. But we actually build our business model on disrupting our industry for that very reason. And our customers that are in your industry and are of similar size, they've found an average time of purchase to implementation to be between 3 and 5 weeks, and the time to value to be about 1.5 months. All right, so now that we've expressed that empathy, it's time to trial close, which sounds like, does this fit into the same time frame your executive team requires? And if the prospect isn't satisfied yet, then asking for confirmation lets you continue the confirmation or conversation until he or she feels confident that their problem's addressed. So that trial close is testing the waters again. And before you're trying to close again, make sure you have all the concerns out of the way. So when you've finished putting one objection to rest, then you can ask for more. What other reservations do you have? Right? That's another trial close question. This gets you to focus the rest of the conversation where it matters for them. All right, now assuming you have strong buying signals, it's time to try and close again by asking your closing question. And at this point, you should be using an assumptive or option close. So we're finally at step 5 of that objection handling framework. And so it should look familiar to you. Really, this whole framework should look familiar to the general selling skills steps. And that's because I consider this a closed loop method that you continue using until your prospect is all out of objections. And so if it's time to close again, we're going to ask using a closing question. And at this point, you should probably be using an assumptive or an option close. So just to recap, we're finding the real objection. It's a lot like gathering information. We're expressing empathy, very similar to paraphrasing. We're presenting features and layering your benefits, same as step 4 in the sales process. And then we're trial closing and closing, which is the same. So anytime you get another objection, I just want you to go to the top of this framework and start again. It's a closed loop until you get a yes. So I know lots of times my clients just really want to know the magical answer to the common objections. And while there's no answer that works 100% of the time, there are common objections that fall into certain categories that are true across all industries. So I'm going to cover the 5 most common objections along with some ideas on how to address them. So the first is lack of interest. The second is pricing. I can't afford it, it's too expensive. The third is lack of agency, right? I'm not the decision maker, or I can't approve that. Maybe it's the competition, or that they just want the status quo to not do anything right now, stay the same. And then last but not least is timing. The timing isn't right, the timeline doesn't work for us, I don't have time. So let's take each one of these and dig a little bit deeper. Lack of interest. Now this objection is the most common and usually the first one you're going to receive in the engagement. And it may even come immediately following your opening. Sometimes you get a straightforward statement like, I'm not interested. But often this challenge is kind of nicely masked as a request for details, like, can you send me more information? Now you can leverage this response as an opportunity to ask a few qualifying questions. Sounds like gathering information, right? Don't let a simple objection like this derail you from the steps of your selling process. Just keep going. You're trying to get to the next step in your process. So if you're asked for more information, say something like, absolutely. Can I ask a few questions about your business or your role in the company so I'm sure that I'm sending you all the relevant information you need? And then you can follow with some key qualifying questions. Second most common objection, price. So this is actually a good thing if price is truly the only objection, because it means it's all about the money and we might be able to get creative. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Lots of books have been written on budget negotiations alone. And we know that according to a recent survey that HubSpot did, over 35% of today's sellers say their biggest challenge is overcoming price objections. So the main thing to remember is this: for prospects to consider moving from status quo, the perceived value needs to be greater than the price. And that means you need to spend your time building higher value with stories of similar clients and the return on investment they achieved both qualitatively and quantitatively. So if a prospect tells you that your product or service costs too much, and you've already asked a clarifying question to confirm that price truly is the problem, then you can say, look, I understand the price might have been more than your team initially budgeted. That's your empathy statement. I've got lots of examples of us establishing a lot more value than you had initially expected to. You're pointing to features and benefits you've already covered. If we can show you clearly throughout this process that our value far outweighs the cost, would you be open to continuing working with us towards a solution? That was your trial close. Okay? Assuming we got a positive response, your best closing technique here is an option or contain choice close, because you want to try and find a price structure that works for them based on their price objection. Next most common objection, lack of agency. And this one can come right in the beginning of your sales process as well, again, typically in your opening, but you'd really be surprised how many times people let you get all the way to the end before telling you it's not their call. Now, most business-to-business transactions, even in small startups, involve multiple stakeholders. And so some members have full decision-making authority, while others are really just influencers behind the scenes. So you need to be prepared to align the value of your product or service to potential influencers. And that positioning can help you establish a champion within your deal. So if you got to the end and found out that you're talking to an influencer, it's okay. Inside influencers are always a good thing. And so here's a response for a potential influencer. Look, I understand you might not be the final decision maker here, but our product or service impacts your role significantly. And so I'd really appreciate the opportunity to learn a bit more about your needs so that when I engage with the decision maker, I have the right information to share with them. The idea here is that you run your full sales process on each person you meet in the organization. Because in a complex consultative sale, we need all the influencers we can get. And really, a personal introduction to the decision maker is the best. You can also offer to write a shareable email for your contact to forward to a decision maker on your behalf. This strategy can ensure that all the value points that you want to cover are included. Common objection number 4, competition. Now, every salesperson should be able to make a strong case against their competitors. If you don't have a strong sense of your position in the market, then it's time to bring together the top people in your business and create that SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your top competitors so that you really understand where you're stronger or maybe weaker, because we want to focus on your strengths. And this exercise can help you develop kind of a series of objection handling or conversation strategies that play to your strengths and move away from your weaknesses. So if your prospect mentions a competitor, say something like this: it's great that you're looking at all your options. You know, my goal is to help you make the best decision for your company. And so while I can't really speak to the competition, we've built our product and service with the specific needs of someone like you in mind. And so here's how we handle solving this challenge. And then you can go into the features and layering your benefits and follow that same objection handling framework all the way down to your closing question. All right, last but not least is the timing objection. And like the old adage says, timing is everything. Well, in sales, it might not be everything, but timing is definitely a key factor in every deal. And so the reality is it's nearly impossible to get the timing exactly right naturally. And instead, salespeople really have to create urgency and shorten that timeline. And it's not always easy. We know that from another recent survey that HubSpot did, 42% of salespeople struggle to create urgency. So one of the most effective strategies you can use to kind of push timelines up is by establishing more value. And so asking questions that uncover any compelling events or reasons to move from the status quo to sooner is always helpful. And if timing is still the objection, then it's an indicator that your prospects really aren't bought in yet, right? You've got some more work to do on building value. So find out how the prospect defines their success criteria, and then try to paint a picture of what a successful journey looks like when they partner with you. And so finally, if timing really isn't ideal, then you want to be sure to get a clear commitment on a future timeline. And that might sound something like this. Look, I totally understand timing might not be perfect right now. Most of our customers took several months to consider this type of product or solution before ultimately making a choice. And I'd just like to ask a few questions to help me diagnose like an appropriate time to reconnect with your team in the future. And so this is the part where you can follow on with some key qualification questions and maybe uncover some additional needs that you can address in order to increase that value. You can close it by saying, if I can show you how we can deliver value X, would you be open to connecting with me in Y timeframe? All right, so again, this framework is a closed loop method. So while you're always going to feel an urgency to close and generate revenue for your business, I want you to remember that your prospect needs to go through their own buying process. And your job is to guide them down that path so they feel good about their buying decision. And that commitment, hopefully, has the potential to ultimately turn into advocacy, because advocates is really what we want. Now, setting up a new customer to become an advocate really starts with a complete and thorough wrap-up of the sale. And that's number 8, the last step in our sales process. It's always a good idea to create your own checklist of everything you need to do to wrap up a sale and address any buyer's concerns by reinforcing the good decision that they made with their buying decision. And so I've made a little bit of a generic checklist for you here, but feel free to create your own checklist that makes sense for your business. The important thing to remember in this wrap up is that it should happen with your new client, not in the isolation of your office. And so I want you to remember to include them in this process and be sure to reinforce their decision and protect yourself from buyer's remorse by saying something like, "You made a great decision today, and I'm really excited to see the results after implementation. I'm looking forward to working with you." All right, so that concludes the 8-step selling skills training. And like I've said before, it's common to break this selling process into 2 calls. You want to start with the research call that covers the opening, gathering information, and paraphrasing, and then schedule the next meeting to make a recommendation call that includes presenting your features and benefits, trial close and recommendation, your close, handling any objections if there are some, and then finally wrapping up the sale. Now, I thought I would be remiss today if I didn't address kind of the elephant in the room, which is that we're currently operating in a COVID-19 world, right? So sales in a COVID-19 world budget is also a known factor in getting any deal done right now, especially during the end of the month or the end of a quarter. So in the past, a savvy sales pro might be able to overcome a budget freeze to land a deal. But we're in a whole new ballgame here with a virus-caused economic slowdown that's then causing a budget freeze. And that's a whole new obstacle. So today's selling landscape is really unique because the budget objection itself has really changed. And so here's what we know through some quick research. Purchases with quantifiable return on investment is what's getting approved right now because every dollar matters. So try to present your product or service in a way that demonstrates a quantifiable return on investment. If you can do that, you'll push urgency and close a sale sooner. Now, business growth is still important, but with the new environment we're living in, we're all focusing significant amounts of our time on ways to save money, improve productivity, and mitigate risk. And improving productivity and mitigating risk ultimately save us money, right? So it's really important to focus on that saving money as the ultimate benefit when you're layering your benefit statements, assuming that's an ultimate benefit of the product or service that you offer. Or can you tweak your product and service so that you can show that they'll save money by investing in your product or service? Tim Ritter's CFO from Gong came out with a quote this week, and it's, "The best way to get a deal done today is to prove how you're going to help increase remote productivity, enhance visibility into their business, or increase agility. You have to come prepared to show how a specific investment will indeed save the company hard dollars. The bar for measurable and rapid return on investment is much higher than it was before." And I think that's true. All right, guys, we've got a couple of minutes for questions, so I'll leave that questions panel open to see if anyone has any. And as I wait for a couple of questions, I'll just go through some closing information. The Women's Business Center is made possible through several partnership agencies. Our primary funding comes from the U.S. Small Business Administration as well as the Wyoming Business Council. This is some contact information for myself, the microfinance department, and then also a couple of additional business counselors, the Wyoming Women's Business Center. Our business counseling and training is always free. So if you'd like to role play a sales call, or if you have any questions about our selling skills training, feel free to reach out to me directly. My phone number and email is on the screen right now. And then lastly, just a heads up that we have a webinar tomorrow, Expert Insights. We've got 3 professional photographers from around the state joining us to talk about photography and tips and tricks to take your own images. So that's tomorrow from 12 to 1. And you can go to our website at wyomingwomen.org if you'd like to register for that webinar. And of course, it will also be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. So as we close out today, I'm going to ask you to complete the survey. We've changed up the questions a little bit, and so we appreciate your feedback. And thanks again for attending our 6-part series on selling skills. Hope you enjoyed it, and reach out to us again if you have any questions. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.